Bonjour, my friends. I am at the part of Sartre's discussion of love and being and nothingness, and I thought I would read a few quotes. I think it's a really interesting section, and probably you know about Sartre's ideas about the difference between being in itself and being for itself, and then also le regard, the look, but I'll go over those really quickly. So basically, Sartre feels that human beings are both facticity and transcendence. We are, in a sense, the in itself in terms of facticity, because we are born in a certain year, in a certain place. We are, all of the things that we can sort of factually say about ourselves, but we are never only all of those facts. We can set a particular meaning to the place that we were born and our childhood experience, etc. And we always have the ability to transcend any sort of situation or imagined ideal of ourselves. In fact, we are not even a self, we are the project of selfing. And this is what creates our freedom, the nothingness, the gap between, our project and the realization of it. We're always something more. Even if we've achieved the degree, we've achieved the romantic partner, we've achieved the house and the kids, etc. One might ask in sort of judgment, why are we always dissatisfied? It's because of our ontological positionality. We will never be complete and whole, even as Heidegger says, until death. And then everything that we have done remains static. There's no more possibility for it. And so, because our freedom, our nothingness, are a being for itself, which is a project of selfing, is who we are, that is everything that we fundamentally are. When we encounter another person, we are taken out of our sort of almost mindless being and projecting and acting in our subjectivity, and we suddenly become self-conscious and feel somehow objectified. The other is an other who also has this transcendence and freedom. And so by looking at us, something happens where it's almost like we're captured, like we feel shame. For instance, you could be a professor in the classroom writing notes on the board before class starts, and you might be experiencing that. You can articulate that experience as feeling just peace. You're in the flow, you're not really thinking of anything. It's very meditative, etc. But what happens when a student comes in early and they come in the classroom and they sit down? You might freeze, not because of anything that you would really understand rationally. You're not scared of the student, but the student, another presence in there that's not a thing, that's not an object, but a subject, has the freedom to judge you, to evaluate you, to just, and not even that, just to the look to look at you. You're being looked at. And so suddenly you're self-aware. And this creates some kind of discomfort. And Sartre's, a lot of his project is explaining that discomfort. And so in a sense, Sartre feels that our instinct or our desire to love, to be in a loving relationship, is an attempt to seek a resolution or a solution to the shame of being looked at continually in the encounters of others. And one more thing I want to say is that, you know, you can contrast this with being alone. Well, just, I guess I'll go back to just the situation of the professor alone in the classroom. You are, let's say you are the professor, you are in a body in situation, you are surrounded by items in your environment, but they are all objects. They can't look at you. Your pen can't look at you. Your whiteboard can't look at you. They don't. These in itself kind of items, like Sartre always uses the example of the inkwell, is what it is. It can't transcend itself. There's no look. So, you know, we're bringing up the ideas of a subject versus object. But we can always toggle back and forth between ourselves as subjects and ourselves as objects, and also the other as an object and the other as a subject. You know, Hegel talks about this shifting kind of these shifting stages of consciousness when he's talking about the master-slave dialectic, and then, you know, where we have freedom. And so love, in a sense, can give us the idea that we feel safe and secure in the other's consciousness, because there is an increasing level of knowing. There is an assumption or hope or expectation of sort of a limiting of one's transcendence to commit to the other person. But Sartre says that this love always fails. There's always insecurity in it. And, well, one thing, because wanting the other to freely choose us, but then be limited in their transcendence and fixed in that choice, is contradictory. If we consider the other person, our lover, as an object, or ourself as an object, this, Sartre says, and I think everyone would agree, that this isn't really love. That's seduction, that's possession, that's even like a sadism or a masochism, which he gets into in the same section after he talks about love for a while. So in a sense, even if we can align with our lovers and both commit to limiting our transcendence and our freedom as we are necessarily freely choosing another, this cannot be constant, because what we are at our foundation is a nothingness that we're always projecting ourselves forward to future possibilities. In thought, imagination, fantasy, also in our temporality and our spatiality. And so this creates risk, because there's always a possibility of jealousy, of someone finding a new lover to choose to not continue in a relationship, or the understanding of the other might shift so that the look is no longer one of safety and security, but it returns to one of shame because the lover is disappointed or dissatisfied, etc. So for Sartre, just like, any random subject or person that we encounter, the situation of two lovers, love is conflict. And what authentic love is would be for both people to remain in their subjectivity and resist possessing one another, but yet somehow create, like, achieving pleasure and satisfaction from the relationship. And Sartre says that, well, maybe this isn't impossible, but it's quite difficult. Just because of our radical freedom that we are, quote unquote, condemned to be, or to have. And so I'm going to get into some of the text just because I think it's really interesting. I'm going to read some of the quotes that I've highlighted, because if I just read continuously, I don't know, I usually like doing that, but I don't think we're going to get very far. So Sartre's discussion on love, if you want to read it, is in chapter 3, Concrete Relations with the Others. It's just a few pages in. I am reading from the Sarah Richmond translation, and it starts in the middle of page 485. So Sartre says, these projects place me in a direct relation with the other's freedom. It is in this sense that love is conflict. We have noted that the other's freedom is, in effect, the foundation of my being. But precisely because I exist through the other's freedom, I lack all security, and I am in danger in that freedom. It molds my being and makes me be. It confers values upon me and withdraws them. So for Sartre, we are both responsible for our representations and what we are in the world for others. But yet we have no control over how other people read us, read our bodies, read our energies, think of us. That is always beyond us. And our instinct might be to want to retrieve what flees toward the other, the self, that the representation of the self that flees toward the other. We might want to capture that. But that is an impossibility, because what we're doing when we try to capture what other people think or manipulate them, etc., then we objectify ourselves. Because then, we might say, oh no, I'm not a selfish person. That's the representation that flees and belongs to the other because of their freedom. I am a generous person. But what you've done there is try to objectify yourself and make yourself into something. I am this good person. And Sartre says that would be like saying, I am this inkwell. And so there is the sort of the anguish of our existence with others. And we can't ever escape this situation either, because even if we are alone in our solitude, there is always the memory and the reality that there is a consciousness out there that might be continuing to objectify us, even if, we haven't seen them in like 2 years or more, etc. So Sartre says, it is certain, therefore, that love wants to captivate consciousness, but why does it want this and how? He asks, why does the lover want to be loved? And again, we want to limit the other's transcendence so that there's some kind of safety and security. So we're not constantly, toggling between shame and pride, which Sartre says basically they're the same. He does have this statement that if the loved one is formed into an automaton, the lover, I never know if I say that word right, probably not. The lover finds himself on his own. He wants to possess a freedom as freedom. So I think that's when I read that, I really thought about this phenomenon of using ChatGPT as a subject. Because the way that AI seems to be programmed is to be to mimic and mirror human affectations and even personality and rhetoric, whoever the user is, and be generally, unless you ask it to change, to be supportive. Kind of like an echo chamber in a sense. And there's a phenomenon of humans sort of seeing ChatGPT as a friend or even a lover. But ultimately, I would love Sartre to be in 2025 and comment on this. Ultimately, that's going to fail because you can't potentially keep up the bad faith and the delusion that an object is technology. It doesn't have freedom. It may have the limited freedom to mimic subjectivity. Hold on, I have to close my window. It is Thursday, so oh no, I might have to pause this. I think it's going to be too loud. Okay, I am back. It's been 20 minutes, so I actually just graded some papers and continued reading. So back to the text. I forget exactly what I was in the middle of saying, but basically it would be interesting to, look at, I guess, would you call it a parasocial relationship with AI through a Sartrean lens and try to detect, where it might fail. Page 487. He wants to be loved by a freedom and demands that this freedom as freedom should no longer be free. He wants the other's freedom to determine itself by itself to become love, and not only at the start of the adventure, but at every instant. What we desire from the other in love is neither a determinism of the passions nor a freedom beyond reach, but a freedom that plays at being determined by a passion and that gets caught in its own game. So I think this here is the paradox, the theme of the impossibility that we want both free will and determinism in our lover. We don't want, it would be dissatisfying for our lover to say that I continue to be with you out of duty or out of guilt. That would just fall flat for us, right? We want our lover to freely choose through their passion, desire, and attraction to us. But we understand, because of our own transcendence, that that positionality is not a facticity that will be eternal and consistent. So we always have to engage that, like the Zen saying, the cup that I hold, I imagine it already broken, because eventually that's what will happen. That's the state where we have to enjoy the love of our partner and be committed while knowing that ultimately there is no promise of continuance or consistency. But we can get ourselves into the fantasy that, oh, this is our soulmate, they're going to love us forever, but how is that possible? It's possible, I guess, but you have to continually renew the commitment in one's freedom in the relationship. Sartre says, the lover wants to be everything in the world for his beloved. He will sum up and symbolize the world. He is a this that includes all other thises. He is and agrees to be an object. He wants to be the object in which the other's freedom agrees to lose itself, the object in which the other agrees to find something, like a second facticity. So Sartre is talking about the various moments that can happen in a relationship in bad faith when we're trying to sort of entertain the ideas of merging as one with the other, as that there's a reciprocity in the possession of each other, that there's a merging into one. I don't know if I said that before. So Sartre throughout this is going to talk about the different moments of objectifying the lover or objectifying the self, and how that either can be satisfying, which again will ultimately lead him to talking about sadism and masochism, but that none of these moments are true love. True love is a situation that will engage both people as subjects, which again I think seems reasonable. Being an object of including, I guess, objectification would lead toward this dynamic of always being either the seducer or the seduced, an object that either holds your fascination or that you draw one's look toward you, objectifying yourself because you are a fascinating object. But those are, going to be moments that are not love. Sartre says he does not want to act on the other's freedom, but to exist a priori as this freedom's objective limit. This is really interesting in this whole kind of like moment of trying to capture and limit another's transcendence. All this kind of culminates in the hope that we can feel safe for once in someone else's consciousness, in the look of someone else. He says, if this result could be achieved, the first consequence would be that I was safe within the other's consciousness. That is because, in the first place, the reason for my worry and shame is that I apprehend and experience myself in my being for the other as something that can always be surpassed towards something else, purely as the object of a value judgment, purely a means, purely as a tool. My worry arises from the fact that I necessarily and freely accept this being that another, in absolute freedom, makes me be. quote, God knows what I am for her. God knows how she thinks of me. That means God knows how she makes me be. And I am haunted by this being, whom I am afraid of meeting one day at a bend in the road, who is such a stranger to me and who is nonetheless my being, and about whom I also know that, in spite of my efforts, I will never meet him. But if the other loves me, I become unsurpassable, which means that I must be the absolute end. In this sense, I am saved from equipmentality. I am protected against my eventual devaluation. Thus, to want to be loved is to want to place oneself beyond the entire system of values posited by the other as a condition of all valuation. The lover demands that this loved one should, in her actions or in their actions, sacrifice traditional morality, and is concerned to know if the loved one would betray her friends for him, would steal for him, would kill for him, etc. From this point of view, my being must escape the loved one's look, or rather, it must be the object of a look with another structure. I must no longer be seen against the ground of the world as a this among other thises, but I must be the starting point for the revelation of the world. So this moment of like what we want out of love, we want this kind of romantic twin flame, passionate merging that's committed and eternal, etc. But Sartre is really kind of uncovering the shadow aspects of this fantasy, which is rooted in just the foundational understanding that the look of the other causes us shame. Shame because we're potentially objectified, which means that our freedom, our foundation, flees from us. And then also that in the transcendence and freedom of the other, they mold us into something that perhaps we don't want to be. And we can never retrieve this, because in retrieving it, we end up objectifying ourselves. As if I were a good person, a beautiful person, a wanted person, and I want to be this, and ignore that it's always possible to transcend it. So I'm going to stop there. I think that, this just continues to be really interesting, and I'll probably make another video, but I think I'm going to stop and have lunch and grade more papers. And thank you all so much for joining me. I hope that you enjoyed going over this section of Being in Nothingness, whether you've read it or not. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you. Have a good day, everyone, or a good night.